So one of our major concerns, as you brought up before, is because of the subject matter and because it's a Me Too plays, an overriding concern was the intimacy issue. And so that we were fortunate to have Daryl on board as our stage manager because she's had intimacy training, and so she was able to talk to Steve, and he was very sensitive to the issue of there being intimacy in the play. So perhaps you two can discuss what it is that you talked about before even starting rehearsal.
Sure. If I may give context prior to our discussion. I had never known about intimacy direction in the past. I maybe instinctually knew there was such a thing, but my experience in general at all with anything close to that was stage combat and choreography. I mean, I'm a dancer from way back and a choreographer as well. So I've gotten by with that kind of stuff in the past with other things, but I've never directed something so physically intimate like this. I've actually been an actor in plays somewhat similar to this. And so that brings me to my point in terms of leading up to this. I wasn't even sure, because it was a staged reading, I wasn't even sure how much I should try to do. That's, in honoring the playwright, certainly. But I was aware right from the beginning that I wanted to start by honoring the series. So I knew I had to, and you and I, played tag a little bit in terms of that, and being just very respectful and very considerate of the situation and all that stuff. So I was aware of all this stuff, of the actors. And I was aware of all that, and I was like, well, how much should I try to do? They've got the book in hand and everything. So I had to start to, I had to answer a lot of those questions ahead of time. And this is the kind of play, and you all aren't seeing it right now, so you don't necessarily know, but it's the kind of play, it would be very hard to read all the stage directions. And like some normal stage readings where you read a lot of the stage directions to give, physicality. I didn't really want to do that, and I didn't think that would honor the piece even in a stage reading enough, and in a Me Too series, and actually show the level to which it goes in terms of, and what you may end up talking about also again, is the blurriness of how far it goes from bullying into Me Too, into power struggle. I couldn't do that without staging a bunch of it. So then I realized I had to get some assistance if I could, and so when I even approached you and then you about this, I was like, well, can we do it in real time, where you came in and helped us with some intimacy direction training, etc. I did a bunch of research on my own, so I knew some terminology and some things that were going to need to happen to get us comfortable with the physicality. And so finally, we talked on the phone, and she actually coached me on the phone with this. And then when I got into rehearsal, I tried to incorporate a bunch of things that we talked about. And the way that the first thing that became important to me was, because I didn't know their past experience with this kind of stuff. I didn't know, and it's not my business to know their sexual preference or how comfortable they are in terms of any of that kind of thing. So we had a lot of challenges going into this, and variables, some that you don't know and some you may not get to know under normal circumstances. So you have to, every step of the way, I was like, oh my God, I felt like I was learning a new language. Not only with literally intimacy direction, but in directing you guys in this piece, I was actually learning a new language. I don't know if you felt that during the process, but I felt it myself, so I was
That's
very...
actually a good invitation to get some input.
No, yeah,
Go ahead.
the big thing that stands out to me from the whole intimacy training, which Stephen was like super respectful and cautious about, it was like, he would use these like super delicate words, and Mike and I were like, so like you mean like we have to like mock hump each other, right? Like, that? And because
that's what we've been talking about.
Yeah. No, but yes.
Welcome.
I remember like the first when we discussed what physicality we were gonna do. I think the first thing I said to Stephen was like, I'm a straight man, so I've never kissed a guy before. I'm totally cool with it though. Like let's do this thing. And I remember like the first 10 minutes of intimacy training was like, oh yeah, this is kind of awkward, I guess. But then by the first hour of it or whatever, it was like, all right, yeah, let's redo that scene and let's go through the physicality. And like Stephen did a wonderful job using the techniques he was told to just like make everything so comfortable and so natural. And I agree that like by far when you watch all the plays back to back, this was the most physical. Like me and Mike would laugh at that.
You'd watch it, we saw the plays, and we were like, oh shit. We were like, I thought everyone was going to be having sex in this.
Yeah, we were like kicking doors down. It's like everyone's just talking, and then we go on and we're like having like mock sex on a table for 5 minutes. And it's just like,
And it's a 9-minute play. And one of the great things that someone had said afterwards is that about, in this there were a lot of the plays it was about giving voice to what had happened and to be able to tell what happened to you, and this was about the incident as it happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody talked about the incident, the physical, the dry humping incident or the coercion. We watched the coercion as it happened. It was all in the present tense, and that was I think very, very powerful.
Right, and I think that's why when we initially spoke on the phone, that's essentially what I said. And I was like, I think we, like, from my perspective, I was like, we just gotta do it. I was like,
that's
like they're it's just like there's no way to like properly tell that story through just like turning the lights out and being like, oh, you get it. It's like, no, you're gonna get it.
And for you to have like assumed a tableau and then have someone read those stage directions.
That's not it.
It's not it. It's not it. And that's there was definitely a visceral reaction in the audience to you guys doing that, where it was like simultaneous. And what's interesting about like what makes this a MeToo play is that the act of physical intimacy is not really the MeToo thing.
Yeah.
It involves some coercion, and it's really interesting. The gray areas. It involves some coercion because it is just literally forcing Boyd down, but always saying, "You can stop me anytime." And then well, I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I mean, like a lot. At one point, he goes, "How?" And I'm like that's like just true. I mean, the entire time he's like, "You have power," but really, Boyd, like in a technical sense, not in like a spiritual sense, Boyd didn't have any power. Boyd, like, the mother wasn't a tool, she was an obstacle. Like, she wasn't I can just call her this way. And like, you're not gonna call your mom. Like,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Because there's a lot to explain.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, you can just shout for your mom, and I'm giving you permission to do this, knowing you won't.
Yeah.
And by the same token, I mean, there is this, and that's one of the things that this play deals with that I think that a lot of the other plays didn't deal with, it's the complicated feelings that you can have for someone who you're in this toxic sort of relationship with. To go off on my day job for a second, I write for General Hospital. One of the major couples over General Hospital is the famous Luke and Laura, and people remind us in the very beginning of their relationship, Luke raped Laura, and especially in the past 15 years, the show has not forgotten that. And it's actually, and I've had several people come up to me even before I started writing for the show, saying, it seems like on soap operas, women fall in love with their rapists, and that never happens in real life. Yes, it does. I can tell people fall in love with their rapists. People fall in love with their assailants. People, it happens in marriages. So, there are all these complicated emotions that come with physical intimacy and power and like self-esteem and the lack thereof. And it's very complicated. And in this particular play, Boyd even, and people were very affected by the moment where after Justin basically threatens to make Boyd's life miserable, Boyd's response is, "I know, I love you too." And it's like, I feel that that's a sincere reflection. Boyd actually has feelings, but Boyd is smart enough he has emotional intelligence enough to know that, if I go any further with this, I'm just going to end up as nothing by the time it's done.
Yeah.
Like what you said. And I think it deals with all those things, and you guys stage and perform it so well that it really does all of those things and addresses all of those things without discussing all of those things at all. So that was
Yes.
I think
That's so brilliant.
that's probably why the physicality in our piece was a must, because I think the most beautiful thing about the play, and Stephen harped on it so much in rehearsal, and it's so beautifully written, is like there isn't, even if you think Justin is this monster, there is something that's not just black and white. Like Stephen always mentioned in rehearsal, people aren't all good and all bad, and I think that was like the biggest thing that I took out of the rehearsal, is like how deep these characters are, and it's not like I'm just this hateable guy and Boyd is just this lovable guy, but there are moments of power where I'm, the vulnerable one now after having just physically forced him on his bed, and I just think there's so many beautiful ups and downs you go through with the two characters in 9 minutes and 10 pages, and I think without the physicality of all of that, it would not have been so obvious, and I think that's why it was so important, the job Stephen did coaching us with all that intense physicality.
And one of the unanswered questions I, as the playwright, have, looking at Justin, is that I want to know, like, what about Justin's life and the 17 years he's been on the earth? What has he experienced where he equates this kind of behavior with how you treat someone you love? How has he been raised? How has he been affected? What has he learned from where? From media, from his family. It's definitely a paternal thing. But the thing is that you have to there's that entitlement, and there's that brutality where it's like I will brutalize you into allowing you to be tender with
and
you.
like the disregard for empathy. Like disregard to really 100% empathize with another human being and not empathize through what is convenient for you. Like people in this world empathize with someone, but really only through what their gaze is, and what their gaze is isn't the gaze of the other person, and that's essentially why we hit so many roadblocks in this MeToo movement. It's because people won't 100% empathize and trust someone else's emotional value and emotional process, and their feelings, and their experience, and that's you kind of hit the nail on the head there.
Very good point.
And
And
before
if
we
could
leave,
just, yes, thank
before
you.
I wanted to, because we didn't get to have Daryl speak a little bit.
Oh God.
I really did, and if you don't mind me putting the spotlight on you, so to speak, I just really appreciated you spending the time that you did with me, kind of coming at this from left field and green to a large degree, and you really helped me and gave me some tools to use in rehearsal. And I don't know if you want to speak at all about either anything to do with this or just in general your
I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you.
No, I'm very thankful that you were just sensitive in a good way to the issue and wanting to take care of your actors. That to me felt good. And Intimacy Direction is new. Intimacy Directors International, they're a new group that kind of culminated these techniques. And I was taught from Claire Warden, who's one of the founders and certified choreographers for intimacy. But for me, to be able to share what I learned from her, just to pass on the word that you can make a safe space for your actors, made me feel good that like I could take what I learned and share it with people, even if I wasn't able to come into rehearsals, which sucked.
I couldn't go either. Awful.
I know, it sucks, right? But no, I'm very thankful that you just reached out and were cautious of your actors and wanted to take care of them and make sure that they had a safe space to work in. So yeah, it was all you.
The biggest surprise, to be honest with you, was that it became fun. And I think, you know, as much as it started out sort of awkward and like, you know, again, learning a new language for me and you guys learning a new language ultimately in some respects, it became fun, and it became fun to work with you guys, and you guys were so receptive and just like, you know, when I first spoke to them on the phone, I was worried that if I said, you know, I want to do a little bit of, I want to do, you know, a fair amount of this staging. When I first talked to you guys on the phone before really, you know, before our first rehearsal and everything, I was thinking, especially you, you said you wanted to talk to me, you know, can I talk to you personally or something like that? And I said, and I was like, oh no, he's like changing his mind or something, or you know, he's really concerned about, you know, what the play is going to ask of us, you know, maybe on a physical level or whatever. I literally was a little concerned because I thought, is that why he's wanting to talk to me privately or something? And then when we talked, it was like you were asking, can we be off book for this? Can we do this? Like, can we do this? You know,
That's so
and I was like, we're going to try and find a happy medium. We have to honor the series and honor, you know, the genre of the stage reading and everything like that. And we'll see how we can find a happy medium. And of course, with your help, we did. I think.
I know that it's a whole process of training. It's much more complicated than we have time to go into, but most people are probably gonna hear intimacy training and all this stuff, and it's some kind of mystery, and they're going, what are they talking about? But in general, I guess, what it is basically not just saying, oh, go at it.
Yeah.
Can you just try to describe what it is then versus saying go at it?
Well, again, just to give a quick backstory to this kind of work, which was new for me. In the past, when I've done these kinds of scenes or anything remotely along this line, I don't think I've ever done quite this scene before in my life. But the actors would be kind of left into their own devices in a way to get comfortable with it. You know, I've been in shows where I had to, you know, kiss a man, and I've been in shows where I had to kiss a woman, and I mean, like, some of them are more passionate than others or whatever, and we were never coached, we were never led, it was just literally us kind of getting comfortable with each other. When you finally get to that rehearsal and it's like, okay, today's the day we're going to actually kiss, or actually do this, or whatever. And, but there was no, you know, rehearsal for it as such. In this respect, we basically, I think, and you can talk to this as well, better than me probably, is the first thing is to gain each other's trust, and the way that you start that off is by gaining each other's permission to do things, to do whatever. And you're not going to like literally start off, okay, we're going to do the humping first, and then, you know. And so we start off slowly with asking for permission for, you know, just to do subtle things, little things, holding your hand, touching your shoulder, caressing your face, you know, and leading up to things like kissing your forehead or your cheek or whatever, and then finally, you know, asking permission to kiss you on the lips, and then et cetera, et cetera. And the other aspect of intimacy direction that I really loved, which in some respects made it fun, is that, which I didn't expect would happen, and probably in some rehearsals it doesn't happen this way, but it did for us, is you tap in and tap out when you're in rehearsal, so that you're creating a parameter of safe space from beginning to end of that rehearsal, however long it is, if it's 10 seconds or 5 minutes or whatever it is for that section. And that was really cool and interesting, and these guys just were gung-ho, and they made it fun. And so we set up the parameters and the permissions, and then we would go at it, and we would tap in and out whenever we were done with little sections, and it just made the process that much more easy. And because we knew we were in a safe space, they were playing off of each other and respecting each other and all of that, and they knew what they were in for every step of the way, because they would say it. If Justin was in the driver's seat, so to speak, he would say, I'm going to, we tap in or whatever, and then I'm going to do this now. I'm going to start from this line, and we'll take it, and then I'm going to kiss you, or we'll start from this line, whatever. So it was those kinds of things that actually made it made so much sense, and it made it go so smoothly, and it made it more comfortable for them.
Let me just throw this out there. What would you think if, say, relationships were more like that?
I'm so the wrong
Like-
person.
Let's ask the younger folk.
I'll say that I think this is kind of touching what I talked about earlier, and this is like just a universal problem in the world right now, is the lack of like true empathy. I feel like there's like selfish empathy, and then there's true empathy, and the selfish empathy is being empathetic under what's convenient for you, and like asking for that kind of permission and respect, as long as it doesn't interfere with like your like primal need. Which is wildly true. Like people when they're like heated, like do shit that's fucked up. Like, and that's why we're here.
And we now just became an R-rated program.
Welcome.
I mean, I want to add on, because you brought up permission, giving your actors permission, and each getting each other permission. But what also too is important is the difference between permission and consent, because the script, the director, the actor, they can give permission. They can give permission of like they kiss, they hump or whatever. But the actor receiving that action is the only person who can give the consent.
Yes.
And so, the difference between permission and consent, there is a line between that. I'm glad you guys tapped in and out.
That was the hard
We were
part.
really bad at it. We were actually not very bad.
I mean, I wasn't there to explain it, but I mean, the reason why we do that in cases of it is a couple working together, you're doing all these things that bring up emotional, just natural, biological, emotional feelings that is just completely natural. And to us, it might seem confusing because a lot of the times when people don't set up the boundaries, they go off and thinking that, oh, what happened in here could just go out in the real world. But when you tap, I feel when I do tap-ins and tap-outs in rehearsals is that it allows us to keep that emotion within the work, and it doesn't bleed out into the real world, and the actors aren't confused. You are communicating that you are working, and it's going to stay in the work.
Just like an extra detachment.
Yeah.
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 Which it's kind of necessary, because I remember I think it was Nicole Kidman talking about Big Little Lies and some of the scenes she had to do there, where they're intense, and they were intense scenes of abuse, and as the actor, the difference, what's going on, you are pretending. Your body doesn't know the difference, and it's just and you have to kind of separate that as well. I also wanted to add, it's because this is not the first time I've written a scene like this. There are like tons of scenes like this that I've written, but when you're doing an intimate scene and you're writing an intimate scene, there's a different psychology and tone to approaching a sex scene that's a love scene, or a rape scene, or something like this, which is somewhere in between, where you're not quite sure exactly whose perspective, or what one character's perspective and the other character's perspective, how different they are. And the first
step of the way.
Each step of the way, yeah. And I have a play back from 1993, 94, called Hairdresser on Fire, in which it's about an abusive relationship that ultimately ends where the person who is being manipulated, abused, it's emotionally abusive and mentally abusive until the point where the person being abused realizes what's going on and decides to leave, at which point it becomes physical. And he's forced to the ground, and what begins, it's essentially, I mean, just another, for lack of a better term, dry hump there, but it's, so what it is the advent of what is about to turn into a rape that doesn't. They stop themselves. The person who is, realizes what he is doing and he stops. And the entire power dynamic shifts. But the reason I bring it up is that the first time we rehearsed that physical confrontation in this script, and I was dealing with, I mean, the actors were juniors in undergrad. One of them was a little older, in his mid-20s. One was 22. And they're doing this, and they get to this part of the scene, and I'm watching them, and they're like, okay, so I'm going to grab you here, you're going to go down like this, okay, how is that on your knees? Okay, great. All right, so we do this, and then I'm down here. And they're going through and choreographing it themselves, because we didn't have, well, it didn't exist at the time, but we didn't have, and the director, they were both trained in stage combat, and they looked at it as stage combat.
Yeah.
And they were doing it this way, and then it's like, okay, and I'm gonna, like, this is where I'm going to, like, be doing the thrusting, okay, I'm gonna have to wear a cup, or else, I'm gonna get hurt while we do this. And they're approaching this in an extremely clinical and technical way, and then they run through it, and I'm watching this scene that I'd written, and I had never seen, it was the first time I'd written such a scene like this, with such, like, sexual, physical, confrontation like this. So this is the first time I'm actually watching what I wrote in this respect happen in front of me, and while they're completely fine and completely just going at it, approaching it like actors choreographing a scene, when they were done, I got up, I left the room, I went into the stall in the men's room, and I just took a minute to breathe, because I was like, holy shit, what did I just ask these poor actors to do? And ultimately, they got through it, I got through it, and it's sort of, it's how you learn about your craft when you're telling this kind of story. But yeah, they really, they approached it so professionally, and it was a learning experience, I think, for all of us, so yeah.
What I'm curious is that in what they taught you, do they talk about, like, cool down methods? Like, I know, like, a lot of, like, I'm thinking, like, lucid body technique, which is, like, relatively new, and they, like, started at similar times. There's, like, cool down methods for, like, really intense emotional and physical, work, and if there's anything that they, like, recommended, because what you said was, what I felt was, like, your body doesn't know the difference. Like, when I, like, leapt, like, my body would be, like, convulsing, like, I'd be, like, shaking. And then when I'd walk off and be done, I'd be like, well, my head's done, but, like, my body's, like, clearly, like, having a moment. And so, like, clearly, like, in distress. And so, I wonder, like, in that case, if there's, like, a cool downs that they teach you about in terms of, like, if, like, it is a sex scene and it's, like, romantic, or if it's a rape and your body is, like, having an anxiety attack of sorts, like, because you can't necessarily separate those things, because that's the journey. Yeah. So I'm interested in yeah.
I mean, I don't remember, like, a cool down. I mean, I remember if you are doing an intimate scene, don't do it alone, together in a room. Always have someone there.
Yes.
And the atmosphere that I have been trained in is doing check-ins and check-outs, checking in the beginning of the day with everyone, how you're feeling, if something happened to you that is going to cause you to feel weird doing this scene. And then at the end, before you even tap out, just talk about how it made you feel. Like, how's that, like, just getting it verbally out would probably help you. And then breathing. Like, a part of the choreography we do with we do it to breath sometimes. Like when it comes to a caress, like we did this one exercise where we did like a caress and we did it on breath. But because breath is such a powerful thing of release,
Right.
if you as an actor have breathing exercises, that's what I would do.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
That's like kind of what in this
Yeah.
case is what I did. Just like some audible exhales,
Yeah.
but like just like 3 audible exhales. Like when you're done, like for me in this case, like just did wonders.
Because a lot of the times too, when you are doing it, even just in rehearsals, I think the intimacy directors in International are trying to establish like fight choreography techniques into intimacy choreography. So if you're feeling really just uncomfortable or really heated in that scene, just yell hold, take time to just breathe and collect yourself until you are ready, until you're
Right.
ready.
Don't rush.
Don't
yourself.
rush.
Yeah.
And then once you are and you can go on, then do it. And also too, a lot of the times is like if you're okay to kiss during that day, fine, kiss. But if something happened to you or if you're not feeling it, if you don't want to kiss that person, just be like, can we just do cheek to cheek today? And just communicate that. I think communication is the big key. Obviously, when it comes to cooling down, it's individual.
Right.
But I'm glad we're filming this because I could pass this on. But yeah, it's definitely a communication, breathing, and just
Cool. Yeah.
We really have to wrap it up, but I just wanted to pose one more sort of question out there. And, a lot of people sort of think, say this is kind of a phase, this is, a trend, it's gonna pass, this MeToo movement. I wanna, sort of put it out there to you, what do you see in the future of MeToo and see what will happen next?
I don't got time for that kind of rhetoric. Just time for that.
What do you see coming from this?
I think it's going to become normal, and what I mean by that is that we now have crossed over a huge threshold. Even started long before Harvey Weinstein, but certainly that was a huge milestone in the movement ultimately, and is just getting the awareness to be second nature, to be every day. And so I think the Me Too movement itself may lessen as a movement, but the awareness and the effects after it does settle in, it'll just be, respect and or awareness and or, conversation, dialogue about it will become, I think, more second nature. I think it was an absolute necessary thing to happen. Unfortunate that it took till now to happen. That's my first take on your posing of that question.
Right, and it's like, again, we're just like chipping away at these gray areas that simply just like shouldn't be gray areas. It's very simple. It's yes means yes. Like that's it, and it's eliminating, especially when it comes to like, in terms of like the law, like it seems like people in the law seem to like sit in the gray area being like, well, every situation's different. Like it's really not, actually. It's well, we can say that, rape culture is complicated. It doesn't have to be, and it really shouldn't be. It really does, and yes means yes if someone, but like yes means yes in a completely consensual, respectful, 100% sympathetic. We are asking people for permission, we are asking for consent, and then they give it back. It's just like learning how to like properly respect each other without skipping those steps. But like you say, I say steps as if like they should just be second nature. Like asking people for permission, getting it back, actually getting it back, and then like making people feel
Giving consent.
and making people feel comfortable in that they can like truthfully give that consent back, which is another thing. Is like, you know, a lot of the time now, like in these stories, you hear about people like asking for consent and the person not feeling comfortable enough to say no, but does want to say yes, and that's like kind of where we are now. Yes means yes, and giving the person permission to say no.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of like the movement has been throughout these last 30 years or 20 years, all these people feeling comfortable to finally talk about their situations. And I think even on a smaller scale, I mean, like even what we're talking about now, like there are things like intimacy coaches now. There, you know, you had Stephen being so respectful and making sure we were so respected and felt comfortable. And I think on a grander scale, not just talking about the business of acting and that, but I think it has provided a giant insight. And like he was saying, yeah, it seems very obvious, but it takes a movement like this to really kind of knock it home, and hopefully, as best it can, end it. Hopefully, you know, 2020, when there's an election, maybe that'll be the time where it's not as widespread. But I think right now, like this whole movement and plays like this and pieces of art like this are huge in kind of leading that charge and making sure it's not people calling it like just a phase are problematic in society, but like I think it's a very important moment in time versus a phase of just really weeding out this stuff and bringing it to the forefront and making people, you know, 30 years ago, if it happened, still comfortable talking about it today. And I like I said, even on a smaller scale, I felt how differently we were treated than maybe 10 years ago. If we were in the same play, there would certainly be no intimacy coach. Maybe, you know, our director wouldn't be as respectful to us. So I think even on the very smallest scales, you're seeing how this movement around the world affects the biggest things and the smallest things and everywhere in between. And that's my answer.
Lift up your minority groups. You lift one person up, you lift everybody up.
Yes, there you go.
Yay!
But when the MeToo movement has actually been around a long time, but when it really surged this past year, and it was in everybody's, the hashtag was in everybody's Facebook feed. It began very specifically with incidents of sexual violence, sexual coercions, just sexual mistreatment happening specifically to women. And I noticed on the second day, that's when men also began chiming in. And there were specifically a lot of gay men were chiming in about their the abuse that they had held at like the hands of friends, relatives, a lot of priests. A friend of mine just was. It did not involve a physical altercation, but it was about the sort of psychological. Sexual manipulation that was going on in the confessional with a wall between them. So that was, it's terrifying. And then I have my own particular experience, which is if you take anything about this play and make the characters 2 years younger and eliminate anything that looks like a love story, then it becomes autobiographical. Because what happened to me involved a very similar act of physical coercion that was much further than this, but it was at the time I was I did not have the wherewithal. I didn't have any of the self-esteem or wherewithal to even think that I could I didn't know that I could say no. And it's kind of what you were saying about Boyd, where you don't know that when someone is physically overpowering you and doing things to you, and that's why I find it very important where there's a huge difference between capitulation and consent. Because I stopped fighting so this would end, is a very different thing than saying yes. And this was also, and that's why I said before, yes, you can be in love with your rapist. I was. And the thing is that at the time, I was 15, I was in my 30s, I think, early 30s, before I realized that's what that was. I was in therapy, and my therapist said, well, did you feel that you wanted this to happen? I said, well, no. And do you feel that you consented to this? Well, no. well, then it is what you think it is. And I'm like, okay. And what I would hope, just from that perspective, and with a play like this, but other things, that that awareness and the discussion that happens around this will help people of all ages, but especially young people, know that, especially young people, because I mean, I know people who are survivors of sexual abuse from childhood, little kids, where they can, you know, with all this talking, you can realize at the time it's happening to you that it's happening to you, as opposed to living that same amount of time, being 15 and waiting 17 years to realize this happened to me. And I think that that's very important. And I think that that this movement is really, what I want to see happen with it. And again, it's like I'm a man saying what I want to see happening to the MeToo movement. But it really is just that awareness, and not just the awareness of what is happening to you, but the awareness of, okay, well, like from a Justin perspective, what I'm doing to someone else. Because I think just even, it really is, I have a very ribald sense of humor. I've been much more careful about that in the past year, because I will just, say sexually inappropriate things, because frequently they are funny. There's an entire, history of comedy about, sexually inappropriate things. The things I'm watching in William Powell and Myrna Loy movies right now are just like, whoa. This was 1941, but I think I really, and this is the long answer, but I just really think that there's a certain amount of there is awareness on all levels and on different perspectives that can make us all just to overuse the word awareness, more aware, and I think that's what's important.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
It was
My pleasure.
a wonderful play, and you guys were a wonderful team. It was really well received, and thank you.
Thank you.